place during curfew if someone is experiencing child abuse. If you or anyone you know is being abused, help is nearby. For emergencies, call 911. They will redirect your call to the relevant agencies. For general guidelines and inquiries, call the Multi Agency Safeguarding Hub MASH at 1 800 534 2273 or 945 0545. Alternatively, email mash at gov.ky.
Good morning. We are about to start the second sitting, of the fourth meeting of the 2019-2020 session of the Legislative Assembly. Because the Honourable Speaker has indicated that he's unable to attend this sitting, and the Deputy Speaker has in fact resigned his post, we have to nominate a member to sit as Speaker over this sitting of the Legislative Assembly. Under Section 72C of the Cayman Islands Constitution Order 2009. I now call on nominations for the election of a member to preside as Speaker over the second sitting of the fourth meeting for this session.
Madam Clerk, I beg to nominate Mr. Tony Eaton, the member from Savannah.
Madam Clerk, I beg to second that motion once again.
We have a nomination and a seconder of the elected member for Savannah to preside as Speaker over today's proceedings. Does the elected member for Savannah accept this nomination?
I do.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? If there are no other nominations, I will ask for a motion to close the nomination proceedings.
Madam Clerk, I move that nominations be closed.
Is there a seconder?
Madam Clerk, I second that motion to close nomination.
Thank you. As there has only been one nomination, I hereby declare the elected member for Savannah as the presiding officer over this sitting of the Legislative Assembly.
Morning. I call on the Honorable Leader of the Opposition to say prayers.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power derive, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundation for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the governor of our islands, the premier, the speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the leader of the opposition, ministers of the cabinet, ex officio members, members of the Legislative Assembly, the Chief Justice, and members of the judiciary, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. The House now resumes. We have
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of messages and announcements.
We have recently been advised of the passing of a former member of this Honorable House, Ms. Esther Ebanks. On behalf of this House and the entire government and the Cayman Islands, I'm sure the Premier will speak later to it. We offer our deepest sympathies to the family of Ms. Esther, a wonderful lady. In honor of her service here, I would ask that we stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. Please be seated. As we commence this first unique sitting of this Honorable House via the information and stuff that we passed yesterday, I would just like to give a bit of guidance, short stuff. First of all, to let you know I'm computer literate, so I'm having fun with this toy here. For those that are not sitting in the chamber, if you want to take part in the debate or make comments, you will say, Mr. Speaker, and also because of slight problem with my left eye, I would ask that you put your hand up to make sure I get your attention. That is all I have to say, Madam Clerk.
Statements by the Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
None. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not a statement in the usual way, but I just would like to read for the benefit of members and the broader public the memorandum which I wrote to His Excellency the Governor regarding the approval of the amendment to the standing orders and his response. Your Excellency, Section 711 of the Cayman Islands Constitution, Order 2009, provides as follows. Subject to the Constitution, the Legislative Assembly may from time to time make, amend, and revoke standing orders for the regulation and orderly conduct of its own proceedings and the dispatch of the business and for the passing, intitulating, and numbering of bills and for their presentation to the Governor for assent. But no such standing orders or amendment or revocation of them shall have effect unless they have been approved by the Governor, quote unquote. You will see that I have attached a letter from the Clerk of the Legislative Assembly confirming that a government motion was passed to approve amendments to the standing orders. I have also attached a copy of the standing orders, which contains the amendment made. Therefore, in accordance with Section 711 of the Constitution, I seek your formal approval of the attached amendments to the standing orders. Mr. Speaker, just so that everyone is clear, the new standing order, which I attached for the benefit of His Excellency, is Standing Order 91, entitled Meeting of the Legislative Assembly by Electronic Means. It provides, notwithstanding any other standing orders, where it is impracticable by reason of a public emergency or any emergency as agreed by the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition for the Legislative Assembly to meet physically, the Legislative Assembly may do so by electronic means, quote, unquote. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the Governor responded in the following terms. I approve these amendments to the standing orders of the Legislative Assembly dated 22nd of April 2020. And Mr. Speaker, I also confirm that the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and myself have agreed that this set of circumstances with which we are faced, the COVID-19 crisis, constitutes an emergency sufficient to warrant the holding of this meeting by electronic means. And Mr. Speaker, as this is a somewhat historic occasion or moment, I will, for posterity, lay a copy of this on the table of this honorable House, with your permission, sir.
So ordered.
Commit business, bills, suspension of standing order 46-1 and 2 to allow the bills listed in the order paper to be dealt with in this meeting.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the suspension of standing order 46-1 and 2 to allow the bills on the order paper to be dealt with in this meeting. Mr. Speaker, the bills do not have not been given the requisite notice that is normally required by standing orders and by Section 71 of the Constitution. Hence, the motion to move the suspension of standing order 46-1 and 2.
Thank you, Honorable Premier. The question is that the standing orders 46-1 and 2 do be suspended in order to allow the bills to be processed. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to address the matter of Section 77 of the Constitution, which provides as follows. Section 77(1), subject to this Constitution and standing orders, any member may introduce any bill or propose any motion for debate in, or may present any petition to the Legislative Assembly, and the same shall be debated and disposed of according to standing orders. I can't see. 77(2), standing orders shall require that except in a case of emergency, every bill introduced by the government shall be published at least 21 days before the commencement of the meeting at which it is scheduled to be introduced. And again, Mr. Speaker, for completeness, I wish to indicate that members of this House, all members of this House, have agreed that the present circumstances constitute such an emergency as is contemplated by Section 77(2) of the Constitution.
Thank you. Madam Clerk.
First readings, the Traffic Amendment Bill 2020.
Honorable.
No, all you have to say is been read the first time. Is that
Okay.
for second reading?
The bill has been deemed to have been read the first time and is set down for second reading.
Immigration Transition Amendment Bill 2020.
The bill has been deemed to have been read a first time and is now set down for second reading.
The Labor Amendment Bill 2020.
The bill has been deemed to have been read a first time and is set down for second reading.
National Pension Amendment Bill 2020.
The bill has been deemed to have been read a first time and is set down for second readings.
Customs and Border Control Amendment Bill 2020.
The bill has been deemed to have been read a first time and is now set down for second reading.
Second readings. Traffic Amendment Bill 2020.
I now call on the Honorable Minister of Commerce to do the second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Traffic Amendment Bill 2020.
Does the Honorable Member wish to speak thereto?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have a few words to offer in support of this bill. Mr. Speaker, the Traffic Amendment Bill 2020 is a bill being presented by myself on behalf of this government for a law to amend the Traffic Law 2011 to give the Cabinet the powers to grant an extension of the period for compliance with or an exemption from any provision of that law or regulations made under that law in the case of a disastrous event and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to provide a quick response and flexibility to the traffic law in emergencies such as natural disasters, outbreaks, and/or pandemics, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of evoking the Emergency Powers Law, the current law's inflexibility does not allow for owners to renew online without their certificate of roadworthiness being current for over 3 months. Other countries such as the UK and New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, amended their legislation some time ago for the same reasons. The UK, Mr. Speaker, amended theirs in 2004, which was right around the SARS outbreak. As a result, Mr. Speaker, they were able to quickly react to the current COVID-19 pandemic. However, Mr. Speaker, as you know, it's very difficult to predict every circumstance. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have made it broad enough to allow flexibility in various segments of the law. Mr. Speaker, we also recognize the impact of such a change. Hence, we have made the amendment specific to an emergency or a natural disaster, and that the Cabinet can give said directives. Once passed, Mr. Speaker, Cabinet will have the authority to issue instructions to the Director of Licensing on particular issues or parts of the law and/or regulations. It will also allow, Mr. Speaker, for the said directive to be retrospective. For example, in our current circumstance, once the Cabinet issues a directive, the Director can extend owners' certificates of roadworthiness by 3 or 6 months as the Cabinet deems necessary, Mr. Speaker. This will then allow owners to go online and complete the renewal process. Mr. Speaker, just to read the Cabinet's power to grant extensions or exemptions of the Bill 142A. 1, if at any time there has been an earthquake, or there has been, or there is an immediate threat of a hurricane, flood, fire, outbreak of pestilence, outbreak of infectious disease, or other calamity, whether similar to the aforementioned or not, the Cabinet may, by order published in the Gazette, A, grant an extension of the period for compliance with, or an exemption from, any provisions of this law or regulations made under this law. B, give the Director the power to issue temporary certificates relating to the extension or exemption. And C, impose conditions and establish procedures for the grant of the extensions or exemptions. 2, an order made under subsection 1 may, A, make different provisions in relations to different cases of circumstances. B, apply in respect of particular reasons, persons, or particular cases, or particular classes of persons, or particular classes of cases, and define a class by reference to any circumstances. And C, contain such savings, transitional, consequential, incidental, or supplementary provisions as appear to the Cabinet to be necessary or expedient for the purposes of the order. And 3, an order made under subsection 1 may be given retrospective effect. So finally, Mr. Speaker, as a result of this amendment, we should be able to quickly respond to any future unforeseen circumstances. And it gives us a flexibility, as we know the situation we are in right now is quite fluid, continues to change and evolve, and none of us have the glass ball to see what the future holds for us. And so the way the bill is written and the amendments are written will allow the Cabinet to change as we evolve through this current situation and get back, hopefully very quickly, to some level of normalcy. Mr. Speaker, I can assure members that we have consulted with the insurance companies, and they are in agreement with the exemption and the extension or the waiver of the certificate of roadworthiness. And we have found several references or several samples of similar changes. As I mentioned, the one in the UK was done during the SARS outbreak, and we were able to use that legislation to assist us in drafting these amendments. So, Mr. Speaker, I will keep us no longer on this one. I know that the general public are anxious for these changes to be able to become legal on the road. This is the shortest route to get into that. Any other options, Mr. Speaker, would include changes to the police law and other laws to allow persons to operate their vehicles on the road without the inspections being physically done at the Department of Vehicle and Driver's License. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and I look forward to the members' support.
Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the member from Central, Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to just add a short contribution to this change in the bill. Firstly, I will be supporting the bill as an independent member for Georgetown Central, but also to highlight the importance of making this change as quickly as possible, as many people in the public may recognize that the country's finances will be in some difficulty for some time. And this is also a means of income for central government. And this is another reason why it's so important to get this process changed as soon as possible so the government can continue to accept the revenues necessary to take care of the people. That is my contribution, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend the opposition support to changes to the traffic law, but with, Mr. Speaker, with a couple of things that we have thought of that sort of sticks out like a sore thumb on this. And it may be a simple explanation, and we have gone through a number of scenarios thereon. But what came out for us, Mr. Speaker, is that there we recently had a situation where we had to waive a number of licensed vehicle license that had not been done for many years. And whilst this amendment says that Cabinet can grant an extension of the period for compliance, we are mindful that that extension should be utilized judiciously to avoid what occurred in the past where people did not come back to license their vehicles. And then we as members know the complaints that we had from constituents, residents, and eventually we had to do an amnesty. So whilst I expect that the cabinet would be responsible in this, I would ask that the cabinet ensure, but not so much for this cabinet who is going through it, it is for other cabinets that will eventually probably use this for extensions that may never end. Or people get the impression that it is after 6 months or whatever that extension is, that they can expect to get it extended. And the other one, Mr. Speaker, I had particular concerns about, or when we speak of classes of people, of persons. I know that that is a old English way of speaking, of describing different categories of people. But I would invite the government to consider changing the wording of that, because that has been quite alien to us over many years. I can't recall of any other piece of legislation that says that. There may be, but certainly I'm wondering if the Attorney General can tell us or recommend some substitute word for that, because it has that connotation. And I don't want to make a big deal of it if it is accepted old English way of categorizing people. But it, in my view, sends a little something that is not conducive with being modern thinking, so to speak. So I, with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I lend our support to the government in getting this done so that the people does not have to feel like it's illegal to be driving their vehicle. But certainly there, as I said, it must be done judiciously and to ensure that those vehicles get inspected to prove roadworthiness in short order. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wish to speak, I now call on the mover if you wish to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me first address the query by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition. When we were back for the amnesty, we passed legislation for a temporary period of time to be able to waive the fees associated. That's not an issue because you can pay the fees online, we can do other ways. But this is associated with the waiver of the need or a temporary extension of a vehicle's roadworthiness, which was tied to the application. So, and I appreciate, I just want to clarify, but you are absolutely right. We understand the magnitude of this, why it's tied with the cabinet and has to be gazetted, any extension or any implementation of this sort of waiver. And it's just interesting that perhaps if we had this ability after Hurricane Ivan, I was not here, but if we had this ability after Hurricane Ivan to simply extend persons' roadworthiness rather than for persons to go 6 months, 8 months, or 9 months down the road and with an expired vehicle, then we may not have ended up in the position we were with thousands of vehicles after Hurricane Ivan not being relicensed or not being up to date on the records. So I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his comments, and I assure him we did everything we can. We cannot speak for any future governments, but we drafted the legislation as much as we could in a way that would cause the cabinet to be responsible and judicious in their issuing of the extensions to the Director of the Vehicle and Driver's Licensing Department. Let me thank all members in the House for their support and their tacit support in many cases. The member for Georgetown Central for his support. And I think it was a member for Northside yesterday in the morning as we were having coffee waiting to start, mentioned how historically we may come in here and we may argue and fight, but when it comes to matters of national importance in times of crisis like this, we come together as a government. And so I thank the opposition for their support this morning.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Traffic Amendment Bill 2020 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. The Traffic Amendment Bill 2020 has been given a second reading. Madam Clerk. Yeah. Come in.
The Immigration Transition Amendment Bill 2020.
I now call on the Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of the Immigration Transition Amendment Bill 2020.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the honorable mover wish to speak thereto?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I believe that we are all painfully aware of the various significant measures the government has taken, and that industry and indeed every man, woman, boy, and girl in Cayman has had to adjust to over the course of the past 5 or so weeks. Mr. Speaker, in particular, the curfew provisions and the shelter-in-place regulations which have been made under the public health law have severely impacted the ability of people to go about their daily lives in the usual way and for businesses to open and to operate. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, many businesses that have not been designated as essential have been closed completely. Mr. Speaker, we know that a big part of Cayman's workforce is made up of persons who are on work permits, many thousands of them, and that there are always many applications for work permits, for work permit renewals, and various other immigration-related procedures going on at any given time. The closure of government offices has also affected many of the services which government provides, such as the processing of applications for permits and other residence facilities. And with the significant numbers of Caymanians now without employment, we are working hard to ensure that our government departments work together to assist those in need. Mr. Speaker, before going through the specific changes to the Immigration Transition Amendment Law, the Immigration Transition Law 2020, that these amendments provide for, I would like to take a few moments to speak about how some of the services that work, WORC, provides to assist Caymanians, how those services have been continuing during the current crisis. The Employment Services Unit of Work has been working remotely since the 16th of March and continues to support all clients that were registered with work as job seekers prior to the closure of government offices. Some services that are usually face-to-face have been modified. For example, orientation sessions relating to the services that work offers now takes the form of a PowerPoint presentation that is sent by email. Testing of a client's numeracy, literacy, and skill sets that normally takes place in person is now offered online. And career counseling is also continuing as normal by telephone. The unit is also assisting where Caymanian job seekers have been unable to obtain a police clearance certificate due to office closures. The Employment Services Unit is also assisting unemployed Caymanians with new opportunities that have arisen as a result of the shelter-in-place restrictions. These include the need for delivery drivers and shelf stackers. The unit is contacting companies with whom it has an established working relationship to discuss their employment needs at this time and to refer to them Caymanians who may be suitable. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to the matters referred to in the Immigration Transition Amendment Bill 2020. I should point out that some of the proposed changes have been planned for some time as part of ongoing immigration reform, but which are particularly relevant now as processes are adapted to meet workforce needs. Their implementation has therefore been expedited. Others are needed to deal with specific issues arising as a consequence of businesses being unable to make work permit applications. The bill contains a provision that gives work officers legal authority to assist another law enforcement agency when required. This is particularly important at the current time when work and Customs and Border Control officers are already assisting the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service with curfew enforcement and public order. A similar provision exists currently in the Customs and Border Control law. Another change allows the Director of Work and assigned officers to impose fines administratively where an offense does not involve the payment of fees. Previously, this ability was reserved for officers of the rank of Deputy Director of Work or above. Jobs Cayman. You may recall, Mr. Speaker, that one of the key objectives of the reforms to the way migration is managed that I've spoken about previously in this House is to ensure that Caymanians have first rights to job vacancies. A key component to this, which is now operational, is the establishment of a central clearinghouse for jobs. This is especially important now given the number of Caymanians who find themselves without employment as a result of businesses having to close or lay off employees. Through an amendment proposed in this bill, employers will be required by law to register a job vacancy on the Jobs Cayman online portal for 14 days before applying for a work permit. This replaces the current requirement for a vacancy to be advertised in a local newspaper, though such advertising will continue to be optional. During the 14-day period, registered Caymanian job seekers can apply for the position through the portal, and the employer must give reasons why any Caymanian applicant was rejected. These reasons will then be taken into account by the work administrators and boards if a work permit application is made. There will also be changes made to regulations to introduce new rules relating to advertising overseas. I should add that where job seekers currently are unable to register themselves on Jobs Cayman for any reason, the Employment Services Unit at work is offering the ability for their details to be taken by telephone or email, and those details will then be placed on Jobs Cayman on their behalf. This ensures that persons will not be overlooked when a work permit application is being considered. Data captured in this way will also be used to match those persons with available jobs where possible. Mr. Speaker, as a result of the closure of government offices, companies, businesses, and personal employers have not been able to apply for the grant or renewal of work permits. Similarly, those approaching the end of their term limit have also not been able to apply for permanent residence. I am pleased to say that business processes have been reworked, and employers may now send a completed work permit application via email, and applications will then be processed by work permit administrators working remotely. The requirements for supporting documentation have also been eased. For example, it will not be necessary to provide a police clearance certificate or medical questionnaire with a work permit renewal application. Similarly, applications for permanent residence may be submitted via email without any supporting documentation. This will be provided or required at a later date. But the ability to submit an application before the expiry of a worker's final work permit means that the applicant is not prevented from working while the application is being processed. Fees relating to permanent residence, including annual fees and work permits, will now be able to be submitted by way of electronic transfer. Mr. Speaker, I have already stated publicly that persons who continue to work after the closure of government offices, even though their work permit had expired, would not be considered to be committing an offense. Provisions in this bill crystallize this commitment. With it now possible to make a work permit application via email, employers needing to apply for a renewal would be given a window of 30 days in which to do so. That period may be extended by cabinet if necessary. Similarly, persons who have reached the end of their term limit but who are not able to leave the islands due to travel restrictions here or in their own countries will be allowed to continue to work on the same terms and conditions as applied to their final work permit for a period of 90 days. That period may also be extended by cabinet if necessary. Because, Mr. Speaker, none of us really know how long this crisis will endure. Mr. Speaker, in concluding my introduction of this bill, I wish to thank all those who have worked quickly and so hard to develop and modify processes, identify solutions, and make it possible for these essential services to resume during these challenging times. I particularly, Mr. Speaker, want to thank my Chief Officer, Mr. Wesley Howell, and the team in the ministry and in the Department of Work. And also, Mr. Speaker, we owe an incredible debt to the people in the Attorney General's chambers and Solicitor General's chambers who do all the legislative drafting, who have worked incredibly hard, not just to help with this particular bill, but indeed with many pieces of legislation, and particularly with respect to putting in place the shelter in place provisions, responding, reacting immediately to any issues and questions, of which there have been many over the course of the past few weeks. And so, although I've thanked them publicly before, I want to, in this House, really pay tribute to the incredible commitment and hard work and excellent service that the legislative drafting unit continues to provide.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst we recognize the difficulties that we are facing now, and particularly in this case for businesses and employment, and we recognize that work permit holders are also essential to our existence, really. We must also recognize that Caymanians are just as essential, and particularly now when we are, and we must start thinking about rebuilding this economy, and it will take everybody on board to do it. I am thankful that the government has listed how and under what conditions hiring will go forward from here. However, Mr. Speaker, I have seen that same thing said before, that Caymanians come first. I think it's now more important than ever in all our history that because this economy has had to be shut down, that there will be no excuses, none. That Caymanians must be hired first, and the excuses must stop. The concerns I have is if we enforce that, what are we going to do with those who would then be otherwise out of job on work permit? If we're going to enforce that, we're going to have to make provisions to ensure those people are somehow taken out of the jurisdiction. That is the only way it's going to work. And I appreciate the government trying to organize and get this thing in place. But we must, there must be no more reasons why Caymanians should not be able to work. And later on in the pension bill, I will make my own contribution in that regard. But Mr. Speaker, we must ensure that this provision that we are doing here now, that employers understand that they cannot flaunt the law. They cannot do what has been done in the past. We have heard of so many reasons given for not hiring Caymanians. If we are to bring our economy back up, they must learn that they will be charged and prosecuted to the extent of the law if they don't hire Caymanians. First, it is now first. It's no longer making excuses. I'm glad the government is saying that it has to be registered on the portal. We have heard that before. I just hope that we enforce it. Well, yeah, the law hasn't been changed, but we need to ensure that this thing happens. If it requires, I don't know what it will require. My suggestion would be to the government to put more people to manage it. That's the only, I believe that's the easiest way to do it, but we can't have our people go in there and managing it and doing what a former legislator a phrase he used to use in here, my dear friend Benson Ebanks, wear our hearts on our sleeves, and then nothing gets done. I'm not telling us, Mr. Speaker, to walk around with the big stick. I would never encourage any civil servant to walk around with the big stick. All I'm asking is, in accordance with the law, ensure that it is carried out, which is Caymanians first. Because we have heard of employers who come up with this excuse. Well, we sent it out, but no one applied. We have heard that too many times in my country. We want to see the applications. Now, Caymanians, and I speak directly to my people, you have been so passive for fear of being ostracized, and I understand that. You don't submit your application to the Immigration Board because you're afraid that you're going to be politicized, you're going to be ostracized, it's going to affect your family. You need to stop that. You need to stop that. This is the time you need your jobs. This is the time. We just see United States suspend their green card system. Why do we think that is? To protect the Americans so that only Americans participate as far as humanly possible in the development and the redevelopment of their economy. Mr. Speaker, more than ever in our lifetime, we are faced with a pandemic that nobody brought on us. We are faced with the government having to make decisions that resulted in the shutdown of our economy, that people's lives, as they knew them, no longer exist. Now it is our job to ensure that they come out of this better than they were before. And if we do not utilize the system that we have, we're going to be right back to square one with those Caymanians claiming that we as legislators, 19 legislators, did nothing to better their lives when the opportunity arose for us to do it. This is the perfect opportunity for us to rewrite the future plans and the future Caymanians' future. It is despite, unfortunately, this is what happened for us to be given this opportunity. Now I believe we need to embrace it. We need to embrace the opportunity to rewrite to do a paradigm shift so that Caymanians are able to enjoy the benefits of this country. And Mr. Speaker, I am not one to object to people coming to this country. I have always recognized that were it not for immigration and integration, this country would not have been where it is today. But along the way, somehow we lost our way. And we lost the central piece, which happens to be Caymanians. And I believe we can reset that clock now. I really believe we can reset that clock when it comes to opportunities for Caymanians. At the same time, welcoming those who are necessary and needed in this country to help us rebuild. There are certain categories of work in this country that Caymanians cannot handle, or very few of us can handle. And it requires much more bodies, personnel, expertise. But those of us who can deal with it, who can handle it, who are capable of it, here is the time to reset our clock. Reset it, and the future will be bright for those who are given and got that opportunity. No one is going to tell me, and I have said this at least a couple of times on this floor in the last almost 20 years. You cannot tell me, Mr. Speaker, that years ago, this country came from nowhere. We developed the financial industry. We became seamen, became captains, engineers. Coming from nothing and doing all of that, and all of a sudden, that ability to do that just dropped off the precipice. No one can tell me that. I will not accept that. Mr. Speaker, I did my little thing at sea. I didn't get as far as some of the people who didn't go that far as in school as I did. They became captains, they became chief engineer. Look at Lee Jackson. One of my mentors, he was a port engineer. The largest fleet and commercial fleet of ships in the world. He was the port engineer responsible for all the mechanics on those ships. And he came out of Savannah. And you could tell me that all our intelligence, initiative, innovation finished with Lee Jackson and Neville McCoy and Anthony Eden, Andrew Eden, not a speaker, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, and Bosse, and and Mr. Miller from Northside, who was Captain McCoy, Captain Conley, who incidentally disciplined me one time on the ship. And all these people, Andrew Pearson, East End, Leroy Watson, who was the first black captain to sail into South Africa on American ship. It didn't finish there, Mr. Speaker. We are still able to do it. And I'm going to, this is the opportunity now to do it. When I went to sea, I had just turned 18. My father wanted me to be a policeman. Can you imagine? And Mr. Speaker, when I went on that ship and found so many Caymanians, I left here with 6 to go on it. Out of 80 odd on that ship, it was more than half Caymanian. They trusted me. They gave me the opportunity to expand. They gave me the opportunity to learn. Floyd Borden, who was living in Brazil. I went washing pots, Mr. Speaker. I was a gallerman cleaning pots. Within 3 years, less than 3 years, I was an engineer. But it was the opportunities, people like Neville McCoy and Floyd Borden, the Caymanians believed in us. I am saying today that our people are as capable. They just need to be given the opportunity. And the same Captain Conley given me a recommendation to go sit my license and to join engineering school in New York. It was given opportunities. It was opportunity and belief that I would do better than the position I was in. That's what we need now. That's precisely what we need now. We need all employers on deck, whether you are working for an employer and you're here on work permit, or you're Caymanian, or you're resident, whatever category you're in. Now's the time for us to restart this. Now's the time for all those who are here to integrate. Now it's the time for us to come and put our backs to the wheel. Here is an opportunity. Those who, there was a time, Mr. Speaker, when I said to the lawyers that we know how many of your partners we made Caymanians. Tell us how many Caymanians have you made partners. Now is your chance. Now is the chance, in order that you don't have a perpetuation of that criticism that has been leveled against you. If you intend staying here, now is your opportunity to integrate. Now is your opportunity to reset that clock. Erase the paradigm that was perceived before. A new paradigm shift. This is what is needed now. Our country is suffering, and it has happened within the last 3-4 months. If we're going to live here, and I've said this before too, the Premier knows, because he and I used to listen to the song continuously. There's no more new frontier. We have got to make it here now. This is it. And if we want to create a new frontier, it must be in our mind, our mindset. Let's create a new frontier in our mind and involve everybody. Mr. Speaker, things are happening out there that is not good. I just left these chambers prior to the commencement of this morning proceedings, and saw a lady with a child on the street trying to get to Bodden Town. And her appeal to me was to take her to Bodden Town. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it. So I said, no one will even take you? Well, a lot of people should say they offered, but they won't pay for it. That is not good. Now, I understand the separation that is required and distance and whatnot. But don't tell me I'm in a 5-seater truck with 4 doors that I couldn't put that lady and the child in the back. That is what is happening. We got to be very careful with this. When I heard that, that means that everyone is reaching out now because of the desperation of needing that security, that financial security. Now is the time to do it and plans must be put in place. And I will discuss that later, Mr. Speaker, but to bring this economy up, to bring more importantly, change the psyche of our people now. They're getting tired now. They're getting a little tired. Mr. Speaker, this same thing happened right after Ivan. Within a short period there. But the difference with Ivan was that people could leave. People could go to Miami, get a break. There's no place to go. Includes opportunities for Caymanians, and I would not like in months to come to hear complaints from Caymanians who wanted to work, because you can't tell me Caymanians don't want to work, Mr. Speaker, who want to work and were turned down and work permit was given. Opportunities must be given to Caymanians now. If we do nothing else, we must enforce that those who are capable and willing gets on the job. Even if employers need to somehow be a little more receptive to retraining the Caymanians. I know people will want to have their business up and going and back to where it was. Excuse me. That time will come. We need to do it slowly and bring it back up out of this that we are experiencing now. And Mr. Speaker, I talked to the Premier every blue moon, and I know he has the same fears because last Sunday was a blue moon, I believe, and we spoke for a very long time, and he expressed his fears. We talked about it. I talked to other members here. I talked to the AG. And he has his own fears as well about what the future holds. So I'm not coming up with anything that is novel, pardon the pun, that is novel here now. We're in, another former colleague in the person of Kurt Tippett used to say, we're in a pucker, a pickle. Mr. Speaker, we are in a pucker, and according to Kurt Tippett, and we need to work our way out. We need to come out of it. I had one of the things that I do not see in here, despite saying all that, there are visitors, there are people in this country who were on work permit and for whatever reason terminated and then transition and given, I think they're allowed, immigration is allowed to give them grant them permission to stay, like 2-3 weeks or whatever the case may be. Yeah, 2 weeks and then extend it for other periods. Now, I've had representation on that. Those people are here illegally because it has expired. Now, I don't know if they can be covered under the extension the provision to extend that. I think the use would give them like up to a month or month and a half. So those are people, I've had representation on that, and I don't see any provision in here other than the law. They go over to immigration, I think, and okay, that's border control, I think. Yeah, border control. Thank the member from Prospect. So maybe, but then the border control is not making provision for it. So, Mr. Speaker, I, by and large, agree with this, with the proviso that Caymanians really come first, and we make provisions in a humane manner to get the people out of here that no longer or has been displaced by Caymanians. Sorry. I really believe that is an extension of ensuring Caymanians get priority for the opportunity to be on the job. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Call on the member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will be brief because I think the Honorable Leader of the Opposition has said it all. He is right. You know, we are in a period in our history where it seems we have to reset and start over to a large extent. But there are, in every, what I would term disaster, there are opportunities for us. And we have to be quick to recognize those opportunities and move forward with them to the betterment of this country and our people. So I wholeheartedly agree with his statements, but I wanted to especially rise just to acknowledge the work that has gone into what is mentioned in clause 3, which is this job portal managed by work, which I think all honorable members would know has been something that I've been advocating for quite some time. And as a legislator from 2013 when I was first elected. And the Minister for Work is making an off-the-cuff remark there, but I won't respond. But I will say, you know, I did work with the Honorable Minister for Labor last administration as chairman of the NWA task force. And this is one of the things that was discussed, in particular, the way, Mr. Speaker, that it would assist Caymanians in finding opportunities in the job market. And also go a long way to identifying those employers who were, unfortunately, bypassing Caymanians who were qualified. So this is a significant milestone that we should acknowledge, and I want to acknowledge. It is something that has, I think, been part and parcel of my political existence for quite some time. It's something I've always advocated for and pushed for. And I just wanted to rise on behalf of the opposition to acknowledge that this is something now being put in place, and to thank the Honorable Premier for moving forward with this, despite my absence from the process in the past few years. But I am especially pleased, and especially now, where, sorry.
Redemption song.
I am especially pleased, especially now, that we are going to face so many challenges in finding employment for Caymanians, that we now have this tool to utilize. One thing that would complement this, that I would make as a suggestion, Mr. Speaker, is that while we have so many Caymanians now at home, a lot of them not working from home, a lot of them are just at home, complying with the orders to stay at home, they have a lot of free time on their hands. And we do hear complaints in the public. I do hear them quite often, Mr. Speaker, from people who question why are the liquor stores open? Why are we allowing this or that? Well, perhaps the government might consider organizing, using some of the business staffing plan commitments by employers to offer training grants and so forth, because there are online training classes and courses that, while Caymanians are sitting at home idle, could be utilized so that on the other side of this, Mr. Speaker, when we come out, we will actually be a step forward in terms of what we can offer the job market and be better able to market ourselves and find employment. So when this portal is working 100%, Caymanians are going to be benefiting from it 100%. So with those few short words, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to rise and acknowledge that this is something that I have pushed for and the opposition has supported for quite some time. And I want to congratulate the government on getting this done. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak?
Mr. Speaker,
I call on the Minister of Financial Services.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my support to the bill in law and the legislative requirement to have a jobs portal registration mechanism that is now not only been talked about for quite some time, is now being put in effect, and how this is, as the leader of the opposition has indicated, this is a paradigm shift that I think should not be lost, even in light of the other major paradigm shift that has caused me to participate in this and today's proceedings in a way that we have never experienced to date. That, of course, being the need to have virtual meeting of the Legislative Assembly due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, today, Thursday, the 23rd of April, 2020, is truly a historic day for the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, I just want to put on record that as a member of the Legislative Assembly and as a member of the government, member of Cabinet, I opted not to be present at yesterday's meeting of the House that was necessary for the physical meeting to take place in order to amend the standing orders so today's proceedings could take place in such a historic fashion. And Mr. Speaker, the reason I opted not to be present was because it was important that we as legislators not only respect the laws of the land that is now in effect that the government has put forward, but to show respect for my colleagues in the Legislative Assembly, in the chamber, in order for us to demonstrate and maintain the social distancing requirements that would be necessary on the front bench as well as the back bench, and indeed to respect all other members who did have the opportunity to participate in person in amending those standing orders. So, Mr. Speaker, as a result of those amendments that was passed, I am grateful to be able to participate in today's sitting of the fourth meeting of the Legislative Assembly 2019-2020 year via video conferencing technology, as again, I chose and choose to respect my colleagues who are in the chamber and also to demonstrate and live the government's requirements to physically distance ourselves from one another as much as possible during this time. Mr. Speaker, Because as difficult as it may be for each of us personally to stay away from one another, from our family, from our friends, from our colleagues that are not a part of our immediate household, it is so very important, Mr. Speaker, to do so at this time, not only for our safety, but for those of the same loved ones we miss spending time with, and for the safety of our immediate household as well. Because, Mr. Speaker, as a mother of a young child, I am physically distancing myself as much as possible for the sake of my son and his health and well-being. As a daughter of an aging mother, I am also physically distancing myself for the health and well-being of my mom. Long may it last into the future. So again, Mr. Speaker, I say that because I know many people in the community are feeling restless and feeling the need and the urge to socialize and to leave our homes and to get out and quote unquote live our lives as we once did. But I want to remind and urge people, if not for yourself or for yourselves, think about who you are and should be physically distancing for at this time, and whose lives and health you are protecting as a result. Mr. Speaker, with that introduction, I'd like to move, as I said, very briefly to talk about the key aspects of the Immigration Transition Amendment Bill 2020 that I think is certainly going to be a game changer going forward in many respects. And as the members that have spoken before me have indicated, I wouldn't want this to be lost on the listening public about the important shift, and I will use the term that was proffered by the leader of the opposition and his contributions, the paradigm shift that this legislation does now in fact create here in the Cayman Islands. Because if you look at Section 3 of the bill, it expressly puts in law the requirement for all job vacancies that relates to any such work permit application. It must first be advertised and promoted within the online jobs portal. Mr. Speaker, as I said, this certainly has been a long time coming, and the member from Newlands indicated that this is certainly the vision that we as a government had, and certainly at the time as minister responsible for labor, we were looking to see how we could actually create a framework, operationalize a framework, and mobilize a framework to allow for that increased transparency of what jobs are available in the community before the actual work permit process was so far down the line that people locally, Caymanians, RERC holders, permanent residents in that order, needed to be given the opportunity to know exactly what jobs are available in our country in order for them to be able to take advantage of those jobs. And Mr. Speaker, in addition to the jobs portal, which will now become a requirement pursuant to the law, if you look at Section 2B, this is the section that expressly deals with the advertising of jobs. Mr. Speaker, for a long time, we saw, and there were examples of, needing to go overseas, searching overseas platforms to find out what jobs were available before you knew what jobs were available in your own local market. The law now makes it a requirement, Mr. Speaker, that, or I should say, it makes it you are allowed to advertise outside of that medium of the portal, but you must do so no earlier than at the same time as registration to advertise the vacancy pursuant to the jobs portal to be operated by Now Work. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I want us to appreciate and understand that Whereas up until this pandemic, the country, since the last administration, when we took office in 2013, we were trending, or at that point, we had reached probably the highest point of unemployment that we had been at for decades. When we took office, I believe the Caymanian unemployment was somewhere in the region of 10.5%. That number has significantly dropped, and I think we were well within and I don't have the specifics to hand, so I don't want to be giving false information, but it's certainly that number has been halved, and possibly even more than halved the unemployment rate, that is, amongst Caymanians and in general. However, Mr. Speaker, as a result of this pandemic, it is not impossible, or depending on how long these conditions, global conditions, last, we may very well get back to a rate such as that in the medium to long term, or in the medium to short to medium term, depending on how the conditions and the health conditions in particular of the country continues to track or trend. So having a mechanism such as this in place at this time will in fact help those affected Caymanians, those affected persons connected to this country in a real way, to give them an opportunity to see when the jobs do come back in certain industries, what those jobs are and how they can take advantage and avail themselves in a way that is transparent, in a way that doesn't require them to sift through. And as we see during this particular pandemic, it's impossible to sift through the paper, the physical papers, because I'm not sure any of the traditional print media is actually distributing papers at this time. I believe it's all online now anyway. So it was absolutely vital, not just for dealing with this current conditions of the pandemic and the need to socially distance and the curtailment of our usual life during this time, to have such a portal up and running and the legislative backing that was needed in order to really see the policy intent come to fruition. But this, I think, is going to be a very helpful tool to help our people get back on their feet, to at least know and be able to see what jobs are available once the economy is in a position to expand. And in some instances, Mr. Speaker, that may be happening. There are industries that up to this point, and I've had a number of conversations, that have not been significantly impacted because the very nature of the industry, they're able to adapt very quickly to working remotely, working from home, being in this kind of physically distanced environment, as long as the IT and infrastructure is available to support the work that needs to be done. Many entities within financial services, Mr. Speaker, in particular, have been able to make that transition with some teething pains, some others, some quicker than others. But Mr. Speaker, even within the financial industry itself, there may be sectors, the longer that this pandemic and the kind of current conditions continue, may be negatively impacted versus others who may continue to flourish as they are currently flourishing, even in the face of the current conditions. So this portal will be an opportunity for all industries to have a central place to upload the information, so the people in our country, the Caymanians, the persons married to Caymanians, permanent residents, people that have a permanent nexus to this country, who may be disenfranchised in some way as a result of the conditions of the global pandemic, will be able to at least have that opportunity to see and avail themselves at the same time, at least at the same time, if not before, depending on what the employers themselves decide. But no longer will they be having to worry about advertisements happening overseas long before we find out about it here in the community. And at that time, a work permit process is already long out the gate. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I want to thank my colleagues in the government, and certainly the now minister responsible for labor, the Honorable Mayor, Councillor Harris, who are the councillor from the Prospect, who I know has been working along with the Premier in picking up the mantle of making sure that this process could see itself through fruition over the 2 terms in which we have been working on. And Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why the government decided when we, and Premier obviously second term took office again in 2017, and how we could really make this a reality was because during the last administration, there was a disconnect between the Ministry of Labor or Employment and the Ministry with responsibility for immigration. This is now, we have now put this and brought this together in one ministry, and I believe that certainly contributed to the importance of being able to stand here today and support a bill that actually brings what we all have been talking about, hoping for, and advocating for a very long time. And I'm very proud to be a part of a government that has been able to see this project through from start to end. So I do hope that now that we have it in law, that the actual mechanism is in place to be able to fulfill the objects and the aims of what we as a government and certainly as a legislative assembly hopes to achieve through the passage of this bill. With those few words, I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will be supporting the passage of this bill when the opportunity arises.
Thank you, Madam Minister. You were the first person to prove that the system works, and well done. Does another member wish to speak? Call on the member for Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too wish to offer up a brief contribution to the Immigration Transition Amendment Bill 2020, and certainly I will do my endeavor best to keep my comments brief.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, as alluded to by the Premier, in this time of global uncertainty, we are asked, or should I say we are tasked, both as a government and as a nation, to find new solutions to the growing number of new challenges that we face daily. As such, Mr. Speaker, the amendments to the Immigration Transition Law 2018 provides policy changes that translate to an interdepartmental approach that better facilitates the needs of unemployed Caymanians and local businesses amidst this time of great uncertainty. But also, Mr. Speaker, as we have heard in the various contributions by members, most notably lastly by the Honourable Minister of Financial Services, it also seeks to introduce key components of this administration's overall immigration reform agenda, which began some 3.5 years ago in this Honourable House. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, to those key strategies. This bill will enhance opportunities for Caymanians who are seeking employment, as the new provisions will finally give effect to the much anticipated Work Online Jobs Registration Portal, commonly known as Jobs Cayman. This portal has been a key strategy, if not some, I think as some have mentioned, have called it a game changer as it relates to meeting the growing labor and employment needs of this country, but also, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that Caymanians are afforded an opportunity to participate in the otherwise labor success story that has been these are Cayman Islands. As a prerequisite to seeking a work permit under this provision, Mr. Speaker, unless exempted, employers will, under these new provisions, be required to register and advertise all job vacancies using the portal for a minimum period of 14 days. During this period of 14 days, Mr. Speaker, registered Caymanian job seekers may apply for these positions that are now vacant through that same portal, and the employer must recognize the receipt of that application and must also give to the applicant reasons why he or she were rejected or were not deemed suitable for that position. These reasons will then be taken into account by the work administrators and boards if a work permit application is subsequently submitted. So let me break that down, I think, in layman's terms. Sometimes they say I speak in big words and fail to be understood. So let me summarize it as succinctly as possible. When a job vacancy is decided by an employer, that job vacancy is posted online. Those Caymanians who we have been urging to register as unemployed on the new work system, they will see these vacancies for a 14-day period before anybody else. The only way you can see these vacancies is if you're registered on the portal. Those unemployed Caymanians will then have, as the spirit of the law intends, the first bite at the apple to apply for these jobs. And unlike the previous evolution, the previous days, most applicants have no idea whether or not the employer has received their application or whether or not they have been selected for interview or ultimately selected for the job until they usually read about it or hear about it in the news. Under this provision, Mr. Speaker, this radical game changer requires the employer to both acknowledge receipt of that Caymanian's job application, but also requires them to explain and outline to that Caymanian why he or she was not suitable for that job. Two things that have never happened before, Mr. Speaker, and I think to the point made by the Leader of the Opposition, this provision seeks to amend the otherwise honor system that has been employed up until this point, that fundamentally relies on the employer to tell the truth in terms of the number of Caymanian applicants they received, the number of qualified Caymanian applicants they received, and why none of them were sufficient to the needs. They must prove it. They must do so by evidence, Mr. Speaker. And to that end, this provision certainly is a game changer. This provision, Mr. Speaker, will no doubt ensure that Caymanians are made aware and given ample opportunity to take advantage of current job opportunities, as well as long-term career opportunities in both this current uncertain time and beyond. It is a game changer, Mr. Speaker, and Caymanians will, for the first time, be offered real employment opportunities and ones that make it more complicated for employers or otherwise to wiggle free from. Mr. Speaker, the bill also gives effect to changes authorized by Cabinet in December of 2019, which enable new business processes that are central to work's core objectives, and to provide for advances, in particular in this uncertain time, to deliver online services, which, Mr. Speaker, has, as we all will acknowledge, has become critical in our present circumstance under this global threat, and certainly as part of our shelter-at-home directives. Certainly the provision of these expanded business processes will yield benefits beyond our current unprecedented circumstances, and as I mentioned before, create opportunity for Cayman to create and maintain a strong workforce and a well-oiled employment program far beyond our current needs. Also, Mr. Speaker, the bill provides for strengthened compliance capacity by allowing any officer of work, including a compliance officer, to assist any local law enforcement agency in carrying out the functions of that law enforcement agency. And this example can best be demonstrated by the various roadblocks, curfew checks that we see operating across our 3 islands today, that is largely being run by the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service, but supplemented by CBC and work officers. This provision will be the provision that underpins that authority in the law. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the proposed amendments allow for the regularizing of immigration status and employment permissions for non-Caymanian workers. As you will rightly recognize, and members of the public will certainly recognize, as government offices were closed as part of the government's virus suppression strategy, employers have been, to date, unable to submit work permit renewal applications. Public communication was done very early on when the curfew and restrictions were put in place to advise the public that punitive action would not be taken against those persons in this extraordinary time. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, these amendments seek to formalize that stated commitment while also detailing the expectations that are in place to rectify any lapses in work permit renewals under the same specified time period. Just as a point of thoroughness, Mr. Speaker, and to address the question raised by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition in terms of persons who are no longer on work permits or who have been released from their employers. He is correct. It is absent from this particular bill because it falls under the Customs and Border Control regulations. But in those instances whereby a person is no longer employed on work permits, he or she is then relegated to visitor status and would be subject to the Customs and Border Control law in relation to an extension of time until such time that he or she can or may be repatriated. So it's not within the provisions of this particular bill or the immigration transition law in particular. Mr. Speaker, in closing, the amendments proposed in this bill are critical for Cayman's economic survival during this current global health and economic crisis. But it is also critical, Mr. Speaker, in fulfilling our long-term commitment to meet the needs of the people of the Cayman Islands. And as such, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the honourable members in advance for their tacit support of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I will call on the mover to exercise his right of reply.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And I want to start, Mr. Speaker, by thanking the Leader of the Opposition and the other members of this House who have spoken in support of the bill, in particular, the members of my cabinet and caucus who have given me and the ministry tremendous support, advice, and counsel over the course of the many years as we have sought to improve the provisions relating to immigration in Cayman. Mr. Mr. Speaker, I don't really think I need to say very much more. I think everybody in this House fully understands what it is that we are seeking to do, and that the crisis brought on by COVID-19 has allowed us to actually accelerate some of the work, particularly with respect to the electronic communication and processing within the work, within the context of the work department. And although I'm sure there will continue to be some hitches here and there, some teething pains, I do believe and I am confident that the system will continue to work, pardon the pun, that we will be able to use this experience to improve the overall service to both the Caymanian who is seeking job opportunities and who is hoping and praying that their applications with various employers will be treated fairly, as well as to expedite the processes for work permit applications and indeed the other various Caymanian status and permanent residence applications which are dealt with by that agency. And so, Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill to this Honorable House and look forward to its safe passage.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Immigration Transition Amendment Bill 2020 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those against, no. The ayes have it. The Immigration Transition Amendment Bill 2020 has been given a second reading. We'll call on the Honorable Premier to make some comments before we take the luncheon break.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just shortly before we commenced this sitting, we learned of the sad passing of Mrs. Esther Ebanks, former member of the Legislative Assembly, who served from 1976 to 1980. I think we were all grateful that you were able to acknowledge her passing and to honor her service to the country by asking for a minute of silence and for us to stand as current legislators to mark our respect for her service to the community. Mr. Speaker, I think all of us in this House, certainly the older ones, have known her. Some of us known her better than others. She was an incredibly charming, eminently sensible, no-nonsense person who was deeply committed to our country. And even though she served but one term, she was married to the late Dunstan Dalmain Ebanks, who served a number of terms here as well. And she was indeed engaged in political life of this country for most of her own life. I was always grateful to have her support personally and her friendship and that of her family. Mr. Speaker, as a further mark of respect and in honor of her service to the country, I have directed the Chief of Protocol to write to all government entities and request them to fly all Cayman Islands government flags at half-mast for the balance of today and for the whole day tomorrow. I am, Mr. Speaker, also requesting that you, as the presiding officer, do also direct the appropriate staff of the Legislative Assembly to do likewise here. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honorable. I call on the Honorable Minister of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I too would like to make a few comments on the passing of Miss Esther, as we call her, who served this country for at least 4 years in the this legislature, but her service also extended far beyond that. Like the Premier said, she was married to another Cayman icon who served many years in service to this country within these hallowed halls. But she also served at his side with his boxing. And that was another contribution that Miss Esther made to the well-being and betterment of this country. And it must be thoroughly applauded. And I thank the Premier for his thoughtfulness in such a short period to decide to fly all our flags at half-mast. Hitherto, that decision would have to be made by the governor. I am of knowledge when it was only decided on by the governor or administrator of the country. And rightly so, it must be done by the political leader of the country to make those decisions. And I thank him for being so thoughtful in such a short period of time. I too had an exceptionally good relationship with Miss Esther and Mr. Dalmine, and their children. And I would like to personally and on behalf of my family extend my sincere condolences and best wishes for them during this period. And I know, like Tommy, and I say to them, you will be heartbroken in life. You have been heartbroken in life, but there is no loss like when you lose your mother. But keep your head up, and God provides comfort around every corner, because there's no one now to go to and lay your troubles on. You are now in this world by yourself. Make sure you keep your head up and take over that helm that she so graciously and properly laid for all of you. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought I should rise. I wanted to state my public condolences in the passing of Ms. Esther, a former legislator. I know our sons and our family well, and she was always very pleasant to me whenever I met her. I didn't serve with her, obviously, but I wanted to stand because I just recently wished her a happy birthday at our press conference just a week ago. And she will be missed. As we all know, mothers are very special. I just wanted to let the record show that we respect her contribution to this country, and our public condolences should be noted. I thank you.
Acknowledge the member from Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too, on behalf of myself and my family and my constituency, give my condolences to Ms. Esther's family as they go through this most difficult time compiled upon a pandemic. As most of us in here know, I'm pretty close to the family, and I will definitely be on my knees tonight to ask the good Lord to give them the strength that they're going to need to get through the passing of a very powerful and warm lady, not only to her family, but to this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Acknowledge the member from Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to rise to give my condolences to Ms. Esther's family. Yeah, she's actually, I actually have the honor of being her representative. And you will recall, Mr. Speaker, our visits to her, numerous visits, which we both enjoyed. I am very close to some of her sons, having gone to high school with one of them, graduating around the same time, but also through the boxing community as well. I have been close to the family and I've seen their contribution to development of boxing here in these islands, especially Mr. Dalmeen and his production of professional Caymanian fighters. So on behalf of the people in Newlands, I would really like to wish Ms. Esther's family our sincere condolences.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
I acknowledge the Deputy Governor first.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. On behalf of His Excellency and the entire civil service, I want to express our condolences to the family of Ms. Esther. Her sons, Tommy and Todd. Tommy just retired from the civil service, but Todd is a long-standing civil servant, and I want to express my condolences to all her children on behalf of all of us in the civil service. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Minister of Financial Services.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I also want to acknowledge and give my condolences, deepest condolences to Ms. Esther's family and loved ones during this time of grief. I certainly also want to acknowledge the fact that Ms. Esther, being the first woman to be elected to represent the District of West Bay, was quite an accomplishment, a notable accomplishment, and one that I certainly am very proud to be able to stand as she has passed the baton, so to speak. And not just proverbially, Mr. Speaker, but Ms. Esther was somebody who was one of the first people that I sought counsel from when I thought about entering the world of public service at this level, the political arena back in 2000. And ever since then, Ms. Esther has really been a source of comfort in many respects, but also on counsel as to what it's like to serve as a member of the Legislative Assembly. As the Premier said, she only served one term, but I believe she was quite impactful as a representative during that time. And certainly her astuteness and her love for politics and public service never waned since then. And she has always been somebody that I've had regular contact with, and less so since the last couple of years, but certainly want to say I give my condolences to Todd, Tommy, and all of the other children and family members who are grieving at this time.
I acknowledge the Honorable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I join with all of my colleagues this morning in expressing deep condolences to the family of Ms. Esther on her passing today. Indeed, a very sad day, I think, for the country, recognizing the great contribution she made to our development. I did not know her very well. I was but a young man when she served in the House from 1980 to 84, but I do remember that time period very well. I join with everyone in expressing my deep condolences to the family and send them my best wishes. I want to reflect upon myself now, and I realize just how my own feelings are still raw from the passing of my mother just 11 months ago. But I grieve with them and send them my best wishes on behalf of my family and the people of Georgetown East. And thank you, sir.
Thank you. I recognize via the link, Honorable Member for West Bay North.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I too would like to pass on my condolences. And I felt really proud this morning when I spoke to her son, Tommy, who was my classmate. And Miss Esther, like what the member from Georgetown Central said, was a very strong woman, very opinionated, and always, like what Tommy said to me, she was a straight shooter. Through my political career, she has never once failed to pick up the phone and to call me and tell me, I didn't like that. And when I've made the moves that I've made in the last 3 or 4 years, she was the first one to call and tell me, I am very proud of you. And this morning when Tommy said, thanks very much, and she loved you, that meant a lot. And I too would like to say to the family, condolences, but she suffers no longer. Give God thanks and praises for the time you had with her. And remember the good times and the good things that she left with you all. She will live on through you all. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I call on the member for West Bay Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to also take this opportunity to extend sincere condolences to the family. Over the years, I've learned to have great respect for Ms. Esther. She was a sister-in-law of mine, and I know we were close for a long time. We still are until now. I want to extend sincere condolences to all the kids, Tommy, Todd, Tessa, Tanya, Timmy, and all the grandkids as well. She will be greatly missed, and it's truly a very touching moment. And I'm going to ask the kids to keep strong, and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to share with you, I've been in contact with her daughter Tessa and indicated to her that we had a moment of silence with the Honorable House, and she was thankful and most grateful. I've known Ms. Esther all of my political life, and always a great supporter of mine. We had some difference of opinions on occasion, but like the member from Newland said, we always visited, and my wife and I would always take mangoes this time of year. We certainly missed her. She was a special lady, and having been married to her boxing and other icon, Mr. Dalmeen, they made a formidable team. At this time, we'll take the luncheon break. We'll return at 2:50. The Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, this is a bit unconventional, but I've been asked by the Honorable D. Kurt Tibbetts, former leader of government business, to convey sympathies, condolences on behalf of himself and his wife to Ms. Esther's family, and I so do.
Thank you very much. And as I think Dr. Tomlinson, if I'm not wrong, was also her brother who served in this parliament, I would like to take that opportunity to extend sympathy on the entire House. I recognize a member from Prospect who I know would like to say a word.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly you touched on the remark that I wish to offer on behalf of the family. First of all, I offer condolences to Ms. Esther on behalf of the freshman class of members of this House, as herself a former legislator, but also in particular to extend condolences to both her brother, Dr. Steve Tomlinson, and her son, Mr. Timmy, who are constituents, and Gurney. Many others who obviously are not included on my list, and brothers and sisters, but certainly there are members of her immediate family that are constituents of Prospect, and on their behalf, I extend my apologies, condolences, and deepest sympathies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call on the member from Georgetown South. No, sorry. South.
Thank you.
South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to express my sincere condolences on that of my family and also from the PPM family because Ms. Esther was a part of the PPM family and she was very special to us. So I'd like to express my condolences to Todd, Tommy, Timmy, Tessa, Tanya. I think that's it. I said, and Timmy, yeah. And just to say that they're definitely in our thoughts and prayers today at this very difficult time of losing their mom. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. We will return at 2:15.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special Q&A session with medical doctors, local medical doctors, that is, on the coronavirus. We welcome Drs. Delroy Jefferson from the HSA, Dr. Archita Joshi from Health City, and Dr. Stephen Gay from Doctors Hospital. I'm Donna Bush. I'm your host for today. We also welcome the media via Zoom, as well as our sign language interpreter, Ms. Carolyn Powell. Okay, so we're going to begin with Dr. Jefferson. Welcome, Dr. Jefferson, to the panel. Let's begin by telling everyone out there exactly what processes the HSA has gone through as far as it relates to making sure that the hospital and the facility is ready for any patients who may come.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Donna, and thank you for allowing us this opportunity. I want to say on behalf of my colleagues who are here on the platform, that it's indeed a pleasure to be able to address the country in this manner. On behalf of the fraternity, I want to say that it's really an honor
Thank you.